Jonathan Roumie has never chased fame the way many actors do. In fact, for years, he worked behind the scenes voice acting, background roles, anything to survive. But everything changed when he was cast in The Chosen, playing the most recognized and revered figure in history. Overnight, Jonathan became a symbol of hope, humility, and spiritual strength for millions of people across the world. And with that fame came endless questions about his personal life. Who is Jonathan dating? Is he married? Does he have children? But every time someone asked, Jonathan gave the same answer, softly and politely. No, I'm not married. No, I don't have a family. On the surface, it seemed like a choice, but in reality, it was never that simple. You see, Jonathan isn't just looking for love. He's searching for something far more rare. Someone who walks with God the same way he does. Someone who doesn't just believe in faith, but lives by it. And because of that, Jonathan remains single. Not because he wants to be, but because he can't just be with someone who doesn't understand his devotion. In a recent interview, Jonathan opened up more than ever before. For the first time, he spoke clearly about the deep loneliness he's experienced, about how isolating it can feel when your life revolves around God, but your heart longs for someone to share that journey with. He admitted that, in the past, he tried dating women who weren't aligned with his beliefs. He thought, maybe, just maybe, love would be enough, that they could find a middle ground, that respect would be stronger than differences. But it never worked. And slowly, Jonathan realized why. It wasn't that these women were bad people, it was that he was changing. His relationship with God had grown so central, so all-consuming, that being with someone who didn't feel the same made him feel further away from everything he had been working toward. That spiritual gap became emotional distance, and eventually, heartbreak. He said something that struck many fans deeply. He said, I can't date the same way anymore. These things haven't worked. Why haven't they worked? And here's why. God wasn't first. Not in my career, not in my relationships. That one line tells us everything. Jonathan isn't just an actor playing Jesus, he's a man trying to live like him. But that comes with a price. Every choice he makes now, from the roles he accepts to the people he lets into his heart, has to pass a simple test. Does this bring me closer to God? If the answer is no, Jonathan walks away. Even if it hurts, and it has hurt. You can see it in his eyes during press tours. You can hear it in his voice when he talks about rest. Behind the smiles and the polite nods, there's exhaustion, emotional, physical, spiritual. Jonathan revealed that after shooting certain scenes in The Chosen SF, the heavy ones involving betrayal, death, or heartbreak, he would completely shut down. He wouldn't know how to talk to people. He'd isolate himself, struggling to re-enter the real world after carrying such deep emotions on set. And that, too, took a toll. He said that sometimes he would go home, sit in silence, and feel utterly alone, no one to call, no one to hold. Just the weight of everything he had portrayed, and everything he couldn't share. This loneliness isn't just about romance, it's about connection. Jonathan has become a man shaped by discipline, prayer, and surrender. He prays with a rosary. He records meditations and prayers for spiritual apps. He reads scripture constantly. And while all of this brings him peace, it also separates him from the world around him. He lives in a space that few can truly understand. So when people ask why he's still single, they think it's about being picky. But they're missing the point. For Jonathan, dating isn't just about finding someone attractive or kind. It's about finding someone equally devoted. Someone who's willing to build a life rooted in faith. Someone who sees holiness not as a burden, but as a goal. And until that person comes along, Jonathan chooses to walk alone. But how long can one walk alone before the loneliness starts to chip away at your soul? That's the question Jonathan has quietly been asking himself. In his heart, he knows he's doing the right thing. But that doesn't make the nights easier. That doesn't fill the silence. That doesn't replace the warmth of a partner who understands. And what makes this more painful is the fact that he knows deep down there are so few people who can truly walk the same path he's chosen. Not because they're not good enough, but because faith this deep demands everything. And not everyone is willing to give it. There's something quietly devastating about waiting for something you believe in, year after year, with no guarantee that it will ever arrive. That's what Jonathan Roumie has been doing, not just with his career, but with love. Most people see the success. They see the global tours, the powerful performances, the packed churches, the standing ovations, but they don't see what it cost him to get there. They don't see the birthday dinners spent alone, the holidays without someone to share them with, the quiet prayers whispered in the dark asking, "Why not me? Why not now?" Jonathan has spent the last few years trying to become someone better, not just as an actor or public figure, but as a man of God. He's reshaped his priorities, given up old habits, and surrendered parts of his life that many people would never even think to give up, and still no partner, no companion. Just silence. It's not that Jonathan hasn't had opportunities. People assume that being in the public eye means romantic doors are constantly open, and in many ways, that's true. But not the way Jonathan needs. Yes, women approach him. Yes, people are curious, interested, even enamored by the man who plays Jesus. But Jonathan knows what happens when someone falls for a character, not the person. And worse, he knows what happens when someone thinks they're ready to walk the same spiritual road, only to realize later they're not. He's been there. He's seen the heartbreak unfold slowly as the differences become clearer. The values start to clash, and the relationship begins to crumble under the weight of unmet expectations. He's tired of that. He's tired of hoping someone will understand, only to discover they were never truly listening. In one of his most vulnerable moments, Jonathan admitted that his biggest challenge isn't just finding love, it's finding someone who believes as deeply as he does. Someone who doesn't just accept his faith, but shares it. Someone who doesn't see his commitment to God as something to tolerate, but something to celebrate. That's rare. That's why, even as the world praises him for his spiritual role, Jonathan still walks through life with a quiet ache. The ache of someone who knows that love is possible, but not easily within reach. And the longer he waits, the harder it becomes to believe that someone like that even exists. He also revealed something that few people knew. For years, he never imagined he could be someone who lives a holy life. He thought holiness was for saints, for priests, for people who were somehow above the messiness of normal life. People who didn't struggle the way he did. He once believed that being fully devoted to God was impossible for someone like him, a man with doubts, temptations, imperfections. But then something changed. He had a spiritual awakening, one that transformed how he saw himself and his place in the world. He realized that being holy wasn't about being perfect, it was about being intentional. And from that moment, everything shifted. Jonathan decided he would no longer separate his personal life from his faith. He wouldn't just play Jesus on camera, he would live like a man trying to follow him. And that meant walking away from anything that pulled him in the wrong direction, no matter how painful it was. That decision wasn't easy. It meant letting go of past relationships. It meant choosing silence over companionship. It meant saying no when every part of him wanted to say yes just for the comfort of not being alone. But Jonathan knew that if he compromised now, he would regret it later. He didn't want a love that came with conditions. He wanted a love rooted in faith, built on mutual devotion, one that could grow not just emotionally, but spiritually. A love that felt like prayer, a love that felt like purpose. And because he hasn't found that yet, he waits. Even if the waiting hurts, fans often comment on how tired Jonathan looks during interviews, how his smile doesn't always reach his eyes, how there's a weight in his voice when he talks about the future. What they don't realize is that part of that weight comes from this very struggle. Being faithful isn't always joyful. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it feels like sacrifice without reward. Jonathan has spoken openly about how exhausted he became during the filming of The Chosen Season 5. He carried the burden of emotional scenes, spiritual pressure, and personal pain all at once. And when the cameras stopped rolling, the pain didn't go away. If anything, it deepened. Because there's nothing lonelier than pouring your soul into something sacred, only to go home to an empty room. He even admitted that some days, the loneliness feels unbearable. That even though he believes God is with him, he still longs for someone human. Someone he can talk to after a hard day. Someone who understands the weight he carries. Someone who doesn't just admire his work, but sees the vulnerable man behind the role. The man who prays for guidance, who questions his path, who aches for companionship. The man who, despite everything, still hopes. Jonathan's story is a reminder that spiritual strength and emotional vulnerability can exist together. That even the strongest believers still hurt. That even the most faithful men still cry out in the night, asking why love feels so far away. He doesn't want pity. He doesn't want sympathy. He wants understanding. And more than that, he wants people to see that choosing a holy life doesn't mean living a happy one all the time. It means choosing to follow a path that often feels lonely, misunderstood, and full of silent battles no one else can see. This is what makes Jonathan different. He's not playing a part. He's living a conviction. And that conviction has cost him more than most people know. But still, he waits. Still, he believes. Still, he prays for someone who will walk with him, not just beside him, but in faith, step by step. Because for Jonathan, love isn't just about companionship. It's about mission. It's about shared purpose. And he won't settle for less. For most people, faith is something personal, something quiet and internal. But for Jonathan Roumie, faith is not just a private belief. It's his entire life. It's the reason he wakes up every morning, the force that guides every choice he makes, and the lens through which he sees the world. And that kind of faith so deep, so public, so absolutely can be hard for others to live alongside. Over time, Jonathan has come to realize something heartbreaking. The very thing that gives his life meaning is also the thing that keeps him isolated. Not because he wants to be alone, but because it's rare to find someone who truly understands what it means to live a life fully devoted to God. In a world that often treats faith as a background detail or an optional part of life, Jonathan treats it as everything, and that makes his search for love incredibly difficult. He said in an interview that most of his past relationships failed, not because of arguments or betrayal, but because of incompatibility of the soul. Think about that. Most people look for compatibility in hobbies, interests, even politics. But Jonathan is looking for something far deeper. He's looking for someone whose spiritual rhythm matches his own. Someone who doesn't just attend church once in a while or say grace before meals, but someone who builds their entire life around God. That kind of person is rare, and even rarer when you're constantly in the spotlight, where everyone thinks they know you, but few truly do. Jonathan has met kind people, smart people, even faithful people. But that unique alignment of faith, purpose, and deep personal connection, that hasn't come along yet. And so he waits. And with each passing year, that waiting becomes more painful. But this isn't just about longing. It's about sacrifice. Jonathan has had to give up parts of himself to stay true to his spiritual path. He's turned down roles, walked away from opportunities, and distanced himself from people who didn't align with his beliefs. And that includes romantic interests. Imagine sitting across from someone you're attracted to, someone who makes you laugh, someone who seems perfect on the surface, but knowing in your gut that their spiritual values don't line up with yours. Jonathan has faced that moment more than once. And every time, he's had to make the hardest decision of all, to walk away. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much about the future he's building. A future that, for him, must be built on solid ground. And faith is the foundation. This struggle is invisible to most people. Fans see him on stage, confident and articulate, delivering powerful monologues or leading prayerful conversations. But what they don't see is the aftermath, the moments of doubt, the quiet evenings filled with longing, the prayers that sound more like questions than answers. Jonathan has admitted that sometimes he wonders if his standards are too high. If maybe, just maybe, he's asking for something that doesn't exist. But then he stops himself, because he knows the moment he lowers those standards, he's also lowering the very thing that defines his purpose. And Jonathan refuses to do that. He would rather be alone in faith than together in compromise. He once described his journey as a daily surrender, not just to God, but to the process of becoming the man he's meant to be. That includes confronting his own weaknesses, acknowledging his own loneliness, and choosing to trust that God's timing is better than his own. It's a painful kind of trust, the kind that requires letting go of control, of timelines, of expectations. And yet, Jonathan has chosen that path again and again, even when it means watching others move forward in their lives. Getting married, starting families, celebrating anniversaries while he remains in a season of waiting. That kind of patience requires supernatural strength. And Jonathan has shown that strength, not with pride, but with quiet resilience. There's also a deeper layer to Jonathan's loneliness, one that's tied to his role as Jesus in The Chosen. Playing that part isn't just about acting, it's about stepping into a spiritual responsibility that affects his entire life. He's not just memorizing lines, he's carrying the weight of people's expectations, their projections, their faith. And that pressure doesn't go away when the cameras stop. It follows him into restaurants, into airports, into moments when he's just trying to be Jonathan, not Jesus. And that makes his relationships even more complicated. Because who is he, really? when the world sees him as someone holy? Who dares to get close, to see the flaws, the doubts, the fears that lie beneath the role? Few people are willing to look past the icon and into the man. And that makes connection even harder to find. In one particularly emotional interview, Jonathan was asked what he looks for in a partner. He paused, took a deep breath, and said, "Someone who wants to be a saint with me. Not someone who's perfect. Not someone who pretends to be holy. But someone who's trying. Someone who understands the struggle. Someone who doesn't just support his path but walks it too." That's all he's asking for. And yet, that ask is so big, so rare, that it's kept him alone. But Jonathan believes it's worth it, because he knows what's at stake. He's seen what happens when people settle, when they choose comfort over conviction, when they compromise just to fill the silence. And he refuses to live that way. He believes that when the right person comes, it won't feel like a struggle. It will feel like peace, like confirmation, like a prayer being answered in God's perfect timing. Until then, he continues to pray, to wait, to hope. And even though that wait is full of pain, he chooses it. Because he knows that in the end, the kind of love he's looking for, the kind that leads to people closer to God, is worth every lonely night, every quiet prayer, every tear shed in silence. And that kind of love is never easy to find. Jonathan Roumie may be the face millions associate with Jesus, but his journey proves that even those who appear most spiritually strong can wrestle with crushing loneliness, quiet heartbreak, and questions no one sees coming. As he enters this next chapter of his life and career, the world continues to watch, not just for what role he'll take on next, but for who he might become in real life, a man whose deep longing for love has yet to be fulfilled. And the hardest part is, he's still waiting, still hoping, and still holding out for someone who shares his deepest values. He's not asking for fame or perfection. He's not looking for someone dazzled by red carpets or camera lights. He's praying for someone who understands his silence, who sees the world through the same spiritual lens, and who knows that faith isn't just a belief, it's a lifestyle. That kind of connection is rare. And with every year that passes, it gets harder for him to believe it's even possible. Yet somehow, Jonathan doesn't let the world's noise drown out that still, small voice inside. He chooses to believe. He continues to wait. He trusts that God's timing, no matter how long it hurts, is better than rushing into something that could break him. But behind the camera, off the stage, and beyond the fan events, Jonathan returns to an empty home. He smiles at the world, but no one sees the quiet prayers whispered before he sleeps. He's been told countless times, God will send someone, yet he sometimes wonders, has he already? And Jonathan missed it. Or is the person out there also waiting, also doubting, also wondering why love hasn't come yet? He's talked openly about how isolating it is to live in a city full of temptation and distraction, especially when your heart craves purity, stability, and something sacred. For most people, being single in Hollywood might be an invitation to indulge. But for Jonathan, it's a battlefield. Every day he fights to stay grounded in his beliefs. Every relationship opportunity comes with a test. Will this person respect my faith? Will she understand why I won't compromise? Will she love me for who I am, not who I play? And it's not just about marriage or finding someone to share life with. For Jonathan, it's about building a legacy, one that isn't just about acting or storytelling, but about walking through life side by side with someone who gets it. Someone who sees the weight he carries when the cameras shut off. Someone who will kneel beside him in prayer, not just pose beside him on a red carpet. And as more fans come to adore him for his on-screen portrayal of Jesus, the more pressure he feels to live up to an impossible standard. But he's human. He feels, he longs, he falls, he gets back up. And through it all, he keeps walking a path few understand. That's why Jonathan's story matters, not because he's famous, but because he reminds us that even the most faithful can feel forgotten. Even the most disciplined can struggle with desire. And even the most admired can cry themselves to sleep. So as Jonathan Roumie continues to inspire millions, he does so while quietly battling the ache of an unfulfilled hope. Maybe love will find him next year. Maybe it won't. But one thing's certain, he will never settle. Because Jonathan isn't waiting for just anyone. He's waiting for someone heaven sent. And until then, he'll continue living the role. He was born to play not just Jesus on screen, but a man of unshakable conviction off it. A man who shows us that loneliness doesn't mean weakness. It means you're still choosing what matters most.